Welcome to this important webinar. Your genes are trying to tell you something. Are you listening? So who do you know, whether it's yourself, a family member, or a friend, that is confused by diet? Should you be keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb, or some shade of gray in between? Who do you know that struggles with puffy weight, the weight that doesn't go away with diet or exercise, the weight that gets put on, like 1 to 3 pounds from just half a muffin or a small bite of some other carb? Who do you know that's concerned about the genetic fault lines that they've inherited and they want to do something about it so they can minimize the expression of those genetic fault lines, whether they're cardiac or neurodegeneration or something else? 4, who do you know that is curious about optimal health, longevity, and quote unquote stopping the clock of the effects of aging and knows that genetics is the key to that? Who do you know is constantly craving sugar or never feels full despite different diets and supplements, just craving? Who do you know that has shelves, possibly a closet, full of expired or partial use supplements, a quote unquote supplement graveyard? Who do you know that suffers from 23andMe/ancestry syndrome, where they are confused, overwhelmed, intimidated, or even paralyzed by the results of their genetics tests, and they're just not using any of the information they have because they're so overwhelmed? Who do you know that feels unsupported and unempowered by prior genetics testing? And who do you know who doesn't know where to start with genetics testing? Here's the muffin test. It's a test about inflammation. Who do you know that has yo-yo weight? That they eat a half a muffin yet gain 1 to 3 pounds. They've got that puffy weight. They even lose muscle definition or look washed out over their muscle tone, that their weight goes up and downs with their cycle. They feel swollen. And who do you know that is asked if they're pregnant and they're not? And who do you know that has the exercise paradox, which I would call exercise-induced obesity, that the more they exercise, the fatter they get, or the more exercise they do, the more washed out their muscles get, or they feel more tired 90 minutes after exercise. So this is what I'm reading here is one example of when someone is a hyper-inflamer, and when they take on too much inflammation, they begin to retain water. Now, not everyone has weight gain as their sign of overinflammation. Me, for example, mine is pain, not weight gain. But many people have an inflammatory response that's really, really exuberant. Like I'm one of them genetically, that we just have way more inflammation than the average person. And it manifests in different ways. And the person I'm describing here, it's water weight. For me, it's joint pain. And going deeper into the dubious promise of 23andMe and Ancestry, I call this 23andMe syndrome. That you're promised that you'll have the information you need to know to work on your health, that you'll be given a list that's clear and organized and that'll make sense and easy to implement. And that's not true. The reality is that people feel overwhelmed. There's no prioritization. They don't get help implementing changes. There's a lot of alarmism and sensationalism and fear in their results. And you're treated like an algorithm, not a person. So that's 23andMe syndrome. For me, my concerns, one of my concerns around genetics, aside from having lots of joint pain from excessive inflammation, is that, my father is currently dying of dementia and has prostate cancer and is also a stroke survivor. I also have other risks in my family, like my father's father died from carotid artery disease. My mother's grandfather died of prostate cancer. My mother's mother died of Alzheimer's and dementia. And my mother is also a current stroke survivor. So the majority of concerns I've got in my family are neurodegeneration and stroke. And I do not want to end up like my father. And therefore I need to know my genetics. And this is a picture of my father on the left and the portrait of my grandfather on the right. And, my grandfather died at 63. And my father is now in his very early 80s, and he's struggling. And my genetics are the key to preventing as much as possible this from happening. Now, let me share with you also what genetics has done for me. Now, before genetics and after genetics, I had done other lifestyle and testing before I did genetics, but genetics really, really opened up a lot for me. So before I did genetics, I felt resigned and powerless to my genetic fault lines, what I just mentioned before. Afterwards, I felt empowered and I have personal agency. I know what to do. I am not a victim to my genes. My genes are not great. I really don't have good genes health-wise. I really don't. But I still don't feel like a victim because I know now what to do. I had weird energy before genetics. I had weird energy crashes, random moodiness, and hunger. Even though I was on a perfect Portlandia organic Mediterranean diet in which I knew the names of my farmers and their chickens, it wasn't doing well. And after genetics, I had so much more consistent energy and was less moody because I found out my ideal diet is not Mediterranean. It's actually a paleo bordering on keto diet. Before genetics, I was drinking lots of coffee because I thought it was good for me. Because if I just shoved as much coconut oil and cinnamon in it, coffee is going to be great. But really, I had caffeine-induced anxiety and depression, that I confused anxiety for energy because I didn't know that I had a genetic fault line against caffeine where I'm vulnerable to caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. So now I'm off caffeine. It's really dropped my anxiety and depression, and I've switched to alternatives that help my adrenals and mood instead of just constantly taking caffeine. Before genetics, I would have headaches after chocolate and not know why. Similar after high histamine foods. And I didn't know those were the histamine foods until I ran the genetics. I had also ambient feelings of itchiness. But after genetics, I realized I'm histamine sensitive, so headaches are no longer a mystery, and I can control them. I can reduce them. I can reduce the headaches and itchiness. I can even prevent them. Before genetics, I felt like I was trapped by overeating and sugar cravings. And I felt helpless and confused, even if my diet was, quote, perfect. But after genetics, I realized that I'm genetically vulnerable to overeating and sugar. So I look to control my environment, not my willpower. Also, I had joint pain in multiple joints, pain like I was in my 80s, but I was also, but at the time I was in my 30s. After the genetics, I have no joint pain, brackets, if I maintain my genetic anti-inflammatory regime. And before genetics, I had anger and hatred towards my body, that I thought it was broken and failing. But after genetics, I feel appreciation for my body because I know it's doing its best given the environment it's in. So how can genetics be empowering? Well, I want to talk about epigenetics, that the genes themselves stay the same, but their expression varies. That is the definition of epigenetics. That your genes have a default setting, a red, yellow, or green setting, meaning that that a gene is either a red dot, which is known as a least beneficial gene, like you get the worst copies of that gene. There's a yellow dot that's less beneficial, and the green dot is beneficial. So people start at different parts of the starting line. And as you can see from the way that it's pictured, I put this graphic together of the traffic light. You'll see that the light of the red does cone into the green area, and the green also can cone into the red area. And what that means is that your lifestyle can determine where you move your expression into. A red dot will always be a red dot, and you'll have to work harder, but you can still get into the green area. And people on the green dot with a terrible lifestyle will careen backwards into red. So this is epigenetics. Your genes tell you where you begin and where your default reset point is, but your lifestyle can determine how it expresses. So this is the good news of how our genes can be functional and can be shifted depending on your lifestyle. Now, when we talk about genes, there's actually two different types of genetics models. There's the traditional model and the aligned healthcare model. Now, overall, these models are very, very different. In the traditional model, it's about crisis care. It's based on population statistics. The doctor is the dictator, or the practitioner, the coach is a dictator. They're prescribing you to do things versus coaching. There's a victim mentality, that you're in a role of a patient as opposed to a participant. You can just go down this list, like watching for symptoms, supposed to go into root cause, etc. Where the aligned health model is about prevention and precision testing, acting in service, coaching, enhancement, that everyone's actively participating. It's personalized, it's holistic, etc. And in genetics, it's the same way. Western genetics is fixated on the individual gene. Functional genetics is looking at clusters of genes. Western genetics is looking at what's the gene for the pathology, the disease, whereas functional genetics is looking at how do these genes function together as a group, to dial up and dial down certain phenomena as opposed to an on-off presence of pathology. Western genetics is very black and white thinking. Functional is about the gray space. Western genetics is on disease. It's on helplessness and pessimism and on using drugs and symptom management. Whereas functional genetics is on looking at the drivers of diseases, giving hope and optimism because it's practical. It's hope and optimism based on pragmatism. Now, who is genetics testing for? Who can benefit? The answer is everyone, because people will benefit from knowing their genetics if they're struggling with things that are chronically unwell, or they're just wanting to feel normal and just stay the same, or if they're aspirational health enthusiasts that are interested in optimal performance, like they're entrepreneurs or they're biohackers, or they're just into high performance in general. Now, what you want in your genetics tests is really, really important to consider, because not all genetics tests are the same, not by a long shot. What you want in your genetics testing is not more data. More data is not better. You want better organized data. You want data that is organized and, more importantly, prioritized. So when you're looking at genetics tests, you don't want to look for, oh my God, what is all the disease genes I'm going to get? You want something that's more important than that. You want something that is upstream. So there's 4 major criteria. You want to look for not the disease genes. You want to look for the drivers of diseases. And the drivers of disease are inflammation, what's called cell defense, which includes free radical damage, protection, and liver detoxification, your ability to use vitamin D, a process called methylation and homocysteine metabolism, cardiovascular and circulation, and then fat and energy metabolism. Those are the drivers of all diseases. So there's over 25,000 genes, but you only want to pick the ones that are related to these drivers. Then you want to pick, of the remaining genes, the ones that are upstream from the other genes, meaning that they're the generals, not the foot soldiers. So if there's hundreds of genes that relate directly or indirectly to inflammation, I want the genes that control all the other genes downstream. And there's actually about 15 of them, not hundreds of them, but about 15. Then once you've eliminated the genes from criteria 1 and 2, then you eliminate more genes to look at which gene variations, the ones that are red and yellow dots, the ones that have least beneficial and less beneficial expressions, show up in at least 10% of the general population, meaning you're not looking for super ultra rare genes that are 0.01% of the population. Now, that gene's important to that 0.01% person. It's very important. But when you're wanting to start with your genetics testing, you don't want to drill down to some highly nuanced, ultra rare suspected thing. I mean, unless that you have a genuine suspected risk of it based on the family members and what you're dealing with. But for the vast majority of people, just start with the most important genes that are the drivers of all diseases, the genes that are upstream controlling those drivers, and the ones that also are very common variations. And it doesn't mean you can't test for more nuancey downstream genes later on, but start upstream first. And then, possibly most important, make sure that the genes you pick have peer-reviewed research done on humans, not wombats or nematodes, to show that lifestyle, exercise, and diet and nutrition alone can change the epigenetic expression for the better, meaning that the genes behave more green-like. So those are the 4 criteria you want. And out of the 25 to 30,000 genes, honestly, there's only like 150 to 200 that fulfill this criteria. It's not that many. It's really not. So more data is not better. So getting genes tests that are like 800 genes, 600 genes, 1,000 genes, all of the genes, it's not always that helpful. I mean, unless you've got like a team analyzing hundreds and thousands of genes, like it's not very useful. So you just want to start with the most important. Now, are you curious about ordering the genetics labs for yourself? I mean, what type of genetics tests are we talking about here? We're talking about 6 major groupings for genes. The first one is called Achieve Your Natural Weight. We'll go over all these in detail. Achieving your natural weight, which is also looking at longevity, protecting your brain for long term, and stopping the clock of the effects of aging. Identifying if you're keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb, knowing your trigger foods, knowing the foods that cause inflammation, cause stress, can trigger all sorts of digestive problems, and these are that are hardwired. Knowing your absorption rate of your vitamin D, can you synthesize vitamin D from the sun efficiently? Can you use it once it's in your blood? Looking at your behaviors around eating. Are you sensitive to overeating, craving sugar, craving fat, other things? And immunity support genes. Like, do you have some issues around metabolizing zinc and vitamin C, for example, that you would need some more support there based on the genes of your immunity? So the first test I mentioned, the Achieve Your Natural Weight, this is a fantastic test. This is the really, really big one. This is the one that looks at all those drivers that I mentioned: inflammation, free radical damage scavenging, liver detoxification, vitamin D utilization, methylation, homocysteine metabolism, cardiovascular circulation, as well as fat and energy metabolism. This one consists of over 65 genes that is looking at all those upstream generals that are present. The variations are present in at least 10% of the population, and that have peer-reviewed research done on humans to show that lifestyle, diet, nutrition, etc. alone will affect the genes in a positive way. Now, as an example, this Achieve Your Natural Weight profile, not only will it help you with looking and understanding longevity, future-proofing your brain, etc., it'll also tell you which of the 3 types of genetic-based weight gain you may be struggling with if you are in fact struggling with weight gain. There's actually 3 types of weight gain. There's inflammatory water weight gain, there's hormonal toxic weight gain, and there's caloric fat weight gain. Most people think their weight is caloric and fat, and I will tell you that is the least common thing that I find. Most commonly, I find it's inflammatory water weight. And this test will share exactly what genes have gone rogue, and from those we'll know what lifestyle changes to do in order to reverse this process. So here's an example of a client of mine who she went off to join some CrossFit thing without telling me, and she started over exercising a lot, and she started to lose muscle mass, put on weight, and get this washed out look to her muscles, and her hormones were going wonky. And now, when you look at this, don't look at all the numbers and letters here. Just look at the groupings. There's over initiation of inflammation, over sustaining it, and under clearing it. She had problems in all 3. She also had problems with her estrogen detox. So we're looking at clusters of genes. So what happened was that she got overinflamed. Her body retained water in order to do what? Dilute the inflammatory chemicals, because inflammatory chemicals will damage and hurt tissues and cells. So the answer to pollution is dilution. So the body will retain water to dilute the damaging inflammatory chemicals in order to do what? Buy the liver and kidneys time to get rid of them. So the problem is that if she's so inflamed and kept re-inflaming herself with overexercise, and her liver has problems getting rid of estrogen, if she's inflamed, the liver's primary job is to deal with inflammation, or one of its primary jobs, and it won't devote any time to dealing with hormone detoxification because it's busy dealing with inflammation. So her cycles went off because she had a combination of over-inflammatory genes that got overstimulated, and she was unable to clear the estrogen during her cycles properly because her liver was overwhelmed. So the solution is that when we looked at her genetics, we found the fewest number of lifestyle changes that could beneficially help the most important genes. So in her case, putting an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, supplements, and cutting down her overexercise program to reduce her inflammation and help her liver detox. Now, this is just an example of what I gave her based on her genes. Now, what you're seeing here is the answer to 23andMe syndrome, which is we're going to give you hundreds of recommendations with no prioritization and no organization. That is the opposite of what we do here. So what you're seeing here is a prioritized list of what's recommended. In her case, she needed, these numbers represent she had 23 red and yellow dots out of the first 37 genes. And of those 23 most important red and yellow dots, 14 of them, based on peer-reviewed research done on humans, showed that sulforaphane, a specialized nutrient, helped move the expression of these red and yellow dots, most of them related to liver detox and inflammation, move them to behave more towards a green-like expression. Same thing with these other recommendations in order of diminishing returns. So what I've done is said, look, here is the prioritized list of exactly what you need to do to get you the most bang for your buck with the fewest number of interventions to help the most important genes that are red and yellow dots that are causing you problems. And that is the answer to 23andMe syndrome. And dosage matters because some of these nutrients require much higher doses than what it says on the bottle. In my case, it was me and fish oil. I need way, way higher levels of fish oil in order for me to trigger the anti-inflammatory response that I needed. But once it worked, then my joint pain went away. The other thing that this series of genetics tests is going to give you is the 5 layers of your ideal diet. It's going to give you the bottom layer of your ideal diet, the most important layer, which is your genetic layer. So many people are confused about their genetics, and 4 of the 6 genetic labs are involved with understanding what your genetic baseline is for your diet. Now, one of the main components of that is understanding your carb tolerance. So some people are low carb tolerance, like they're keto or paleo. I'm in this range. I'm actually a 2 here. Then there's people who are moderate carb tolerance. These are Mediterranean diets. And then there's even high carb people. So we have a whole spectrum of carb tolerance in the human population. And that's a foundational level realization, because if you're eating the wrong level of carbs, it's affecting your whole system. That's what happened to me. So this is the other thing you'll get, which is my diet matrix construction. Now, I designed this. To me, this is the most accurate way to describe diet, as a series of interlocking Venn diagrams that will focus on an overall theme of your diet modified by your genetic issues. So in this case, this person was, these are the trigger foods. So that was the trigger, know your trigger foods test. To the right, this is how your genes affect your eating behaviors. On top is the genetic recommendations based on inflammation. And the bottom, the foundation, is what your carb tolerance is. And this is different for each person. So for this person, they have a higher carb Mediterranean diet that has to be modified by no alcohol, low histamines, and minimize all food allergens. So they'd be on a low histamine, antihistamine elimination diet that has no alcohol in it. Well, elimination diet has no alcohol in it anyway, usually. And that they also, they genetically are more able to feel full in the normal amounts of food, but they can crave sweets, they overconsume sugar, they overcrave fats. We don't have to go into the nuances of all of these. But this is how you understand diet and how you nuance individual diet to a very high degree of granularity based on your individual genes. Now, I'm going to superimpose my gene, my expression of this, and you can see mine's very, very different. I have nearly a full house here in the food trigger section. Now the gluten one the green in gluten doesn't mean that I can just have as much gluten as I want. What it means is that I am not at risk to celiac disease. There's other reasons to avoid gluten, because of all the sprays that are on most gluten-based foods and other things, but I'm not at risk genetically for celiac. I'm very reactive to dairy. I'm at risk to either high blood pressure or water retention from too much salt. Alcohol and I don't get along. I'm very caffeine sensitive. I'm sensitive to histamine and to food allergens. I also genetically don't feel full in normal amounts of food. Feeling full is not in the stomach, it's in the brain. There's a delay in that signal. I'm also crave sweets, but I don't genetically need to eat a lot of sweets. So if I find myself eating a lot of sugar, which I did a lot in my past, I have to look at, if I'm genetically going against what's listed here, then I have to look at other possibilities. And in my case, was it a hidden gut infection, mitochondrial breakdown, emotional eating? That's huge. or a mineral deficiency that's showing up as sugar cravings or something else. And then I also crave the flavor and texture of fat quite a lot. And the good news is that I can metabolize fat quite well. Also, I need to avoid veganism and Western diets. And my carb platform is that I'm a 2. I'm a very, very, very low carb tolerance, the second lowest you can have. So this is something that you'll get along with much more detail than just this picture if you're doing your genetics. Here's a couple case studies. Before I did the genetics program, the one that I've described, I struggled. This is not me. This is a client of mine named Margaret, quoting her. I struggled with severe pain, sleep problems, high blood pressure, overweight, irritable bowel, and my cholesterol lab work was high. With the insights and guidance of the genetics program, I was able to drop my pain levels, improve my sleep, been off my blood pressure meds for 3 months now. Important parentheses here. With the support of my prescribing doctor to titrate me off as I was getting healthier. So, just to be very clear, she very smartly worked with her prescribing doctor to safely and gently come off medications under supervision of the prescribing doctor. Just want to make that very, very clear. She started exercising regularly, lost 10 pounds. Cholesterol lab work has remarkably improved through all the recommendations like lifestyle, nutrition, supplements according to the genetics. The genetics program and coaching gave me key insights to my health and well-being. For example, I stopped caffeine as my results prove what I suspected. Caffeine is not good for me. Also, I now know my personal carb tolerance Mediterranean, which explains why keto and so many other diets do not work for me. I am grateful for the gift I gave myself to know the insights from my genetics and the implementation program to make the necessary changes. The coaching support was kind yet direct. The coaching support was patient yet practical. Thank you, Margaret. I cannot recommend this program enough. Other case study, short and sweet. At the beginning, I was a bit reluctant and skeptical, yet after 3 months, I lost 13 kg, which is 27 pounds, and I'm in better shape physically and mentally, quit drinking, improved my diet, and have no more panic attacks. All from his genetics results. Thank you very much. That's Alfredo. He's an international entrepreneur. So I want to make the genetics really, really easy. It's not hard at all. All it is an easy to do simple cheek swab that takes less than 5 minutes. We even have a video to show you how to do it. Even opportunities to go through the test live on Zoom. There is no blood draw, no spit, no stool, no urine, no hair. It is just a simple cheek swab. So easy to do. Then the next step is that we make it easy for mailing. For kits are mailed for free right to you around the world. There's free return shipping only in the US, New Zealand, and Australia. We provide the return label, envelope, and we'll get it to the lab in Australia for you. If you're outside these 3 countries, we will provide simple instructions and walk through how to mail it. It's actually really, really easy. We provide the documentation. It's very simple. So getting you the kits and doing the kits is super simple. So how to engage with genetics? There's 3 ways for you to get your genetics tests. There's 3 different layers, 3 different tiers of support. The first is a self-led do-it-yourself. The second is a community coaching where it's an office hours model. And then there's individual health coaching. So there's several differences between them. All of them have the personalized genetics written report. This is your document. This is your personal genetics Rosetta Stone. That it's a beautiful, helpful document that is very practical and organizes your information in a way that is actionable and useful. The second is you have access to the genetics online resource portal, where if you want to dive deeper into individual genes and bigger genetic concepts, that educational library is there and is growing. Then there's also, you get a bonus. It's a $300 value bonus on how to resolve current and chronic stressful beliefs with the Transform Stress into Freedom program, because stress will affect your genes. And, I can tell you quite readily, well, you've got to, stress will negatively impact your genes. But if I need to give you the tools in order to do that. So I'm going to give you this program to you as a bonus for signing up for the genetics program. There's also a written report of findings that gives more detail and explanation as to what's going on. There's weekly office hours. Now, the DIY doesn't get access to the live weekly office hours. They get whatever recordings that are appropriate to put in the online resource portal. They get to review those as they're added in. The community and the individual health coaching have access to the office hours to ask questions to the group, and I will answer those questions. They can submit questions ahead of time. Portal messaging. So if you want to be in contact with the team, the coaching and community gets 2 messages per month where the individual health coaches have portal messaging available to them. Hot seats coaching during office hours if available, and individual health coaches can also get some hot seat coaching. They'll get the priority. Then continuing on with the distinctions, that individual health coaching clients get a recorded video of going over their personal report of findings, not just the custom document. Also a live Q&A on your personal genetics results, a private session. One-on-one health coaching, they get 6 sessions of individual health coaching. And then there's differences in the supplement discounts. Everyone gets a supplement discount. The self-led DIY gets 10% off practitioner level supplements. These are the highest quality, highest potency, and cleanest supplements we have available. And these are practitioner ranges, the ones that I use with me, my family, and my clients. 10% off for the DIY, 15% off for the community coaching office hours model, 20% off for individual coaching. Minimum access to the online genetics programs and library with the option to extend. Everyone gets a minimum 6 months. So this is what it looks like in total. So you can see the different tiers between the self-led, the coaching and community office hours, and the individual health coaching. And this is all on the website, which I'll show you the website at the end of this. Now, how does my tests here compare to the other genetics tests? The Genetics Plus program is very different than other tests. The other tests are 23andMe syndrome, overwhelmed, confused, lots of fear, no prioritized or organized approach. I built the test to answer those issues. There's clarity, there's understanding, you have confidence to know that the recommendations are absolutely sound in an order of priority. They're practical and actionable. Their other genetics tests don't offer or have a very limited knowledge library. You have an easy to understand knowledge library that is going to be continued to be added to, as well as the additional courses on how to deal with stress, which absolutely affects your genes. Other genetics tests are missing keystone upstream inflammatory genes. They're not organized at all the way the Genetics Plus program is. I mean, people ask me, like, well, what about the DNA company? The DNA company is missing tons of the most important inflammatory genes. Like, they're missing the interleukin 10s as of this recording. And those are the ones that put out the inflammation. Like, those are 3 of the most important genes in the entire genome when it comes to health, and they don't even have them. So I'm really, really disappointed in the DNA company. There's lots of fancy marketing, good for them, but I'm thoroughly unimpressed with their selection of genes. And whereas the Genetics Plus program is looking at those upstream's most important genes for inflammation, amongst other things. There's no or limited view on carb tolerance. There's the other genetics tests only look at the variation on carb tolerance. They don't look at the duplications of the gene for carb tolerance. This is a bigger concept. I have other videos that explain this, but basically, it's not that the type of gene you have, it's the number of duplicates. If my digestion is a fort and I have a bunch of carb cutting cannons on the walls, and the Vikings coming are not Vikings, actually carbs rushing the walls, the type of cannon is less important than the number of cannons. So the variation between cannons on this particular gene is actually not that big a difference. Like, I'm just going to pick a number, like a red dot is 90 shots per minute, where a yellow dot is 95 and a green dot's 100. Well, what's more important, having 1 green cannon or 10 red dot cannons that are shooting at 90 shots a minute each? It's the number of copies of the gene that's important, not the variation. So the other genes don't even have it. It's a completely separate test, completely separate cheek swab. It's a completely separate machine process. And they don't even offer that. Now, what's the difference between genetics tests and functional testing? Now, I love functional testing. I do it all the time. But it's different. I just want to highlight the difference, that the functional testing has value for up to a year because the markers in your blood, urine, stool, saliva, and hair, the value of that data goes down over time, whereas the genetics is valuable for life. That your functional test needs to be retested on average every 6 to 12 months, where in genetics plus it's just tested once. In functional testing, it's a repeat investment. Genetics is the single most valuable test you could possibly do if you amortize it over however many more years you're planning on living. Because you can spend however much money you want to spend on genetics, what's $1,000 or $3,000, you just amortize that over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. In terms of value per dollar, genetics is the most valuable investment one can make. So what is the investment for your genetics? First step is to go to the website, drsamshay.com/genetics-program, and there you'll see the 3 different tiers, the self-led or DIY, which is perfect for independent learners who prefer self-study, the second tier, which is coaching and community for those that prefer a community setting with access to office hours, and the third is for individual health coaching. There you'll see the grid on what the investments are. The gene test is $997 for every tier. That's the actual investment for the test itself. The difference between the tiers is the monthly subscription. So there's a 6-month minimum for any of the subscriptions, whether it's the DIY, the community and coaching, or the individual health coaching. The DIY is $47 a month. The community is $147. Individual is $397. All of them have a minimum of 6 months, and that 6 months will get you access to all the different benefits listed underneath, from the practitioner discounts to access to the portal to the bonuses, the written report of findings, etc. So you pick the subscription that works for you. And there's a fast action bonus no matter what tier you do. Number 1 is you get the Transform Stress into Freedom course, a $300 value. It's a course I developed myself to explain how to use the work of Byron Katie to identify and question stressful beliefs, whether it's from 3 days ago or 3 decades ago, which can reduce and possibly even resolve your chronic and current stressors that affect everything in your system and create really negative effects in your genetics, your epigenetics. So dealing with stress is a key tool, and I wanted you to have that tool as a part of a fast action bonus for doing genetics. The second fast action bonus is that there's a while you wait section in the portal, which goes through the most important things that I've seen over working with hundreds and hundreds of genetics clients over the years that I've seen have been the best to help them prepare for getting the most out of their genetics results. So this is a really, really important section for you to get started, and that's also available to you. And to take action today, number 1, just go to the website, then select the subscription tier from the orange buttons at the very below. Then you'll be taken to a checkout, and there's a 2-step purchase process. One is to purchase a subscription tier. Then once you finish that, there'll be a second purchase process for the genetics test itself. Then fourth is you'll receive emails to access the online portal. There'll be some initial forms to fill out to get access to the genetics tests. You'll also receive the Turn Your Stress into Freedom course within a couple of days of business days of signing up for the new subscription, and then access to the online genetics education portal. So the very next step to take right now is to go to the website and select the genetics tier that works best for you. And if you have questions, you can go to this bit.ly link. It's all lowercase, bit.ly/genetics program questions. And you'll be taken a form to submit your question, and then I'll be able to answer that in a video format and post it so that everyone can benefit from your question. Thank you so much for watching this. Again, the next step is to go to drsamshay.com/genetics program. Thank you so much for watching this webinar, and I look forward to helping you with your genetics.